Bridget Emmett, who's going to talk to us about the national perspective and monitoring. And maybe a little bit of policy.
Yep. Thrown in there. Thank you. Can I just check my mic? It sounds like it's working. I managed to disengage it before. There we go. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. So basically, I want to set up the premise that if we're going to have a policy, we better know whether we're meeting it or not. There's not a lot of point in putting this in and then not being able to say. On a more broader scope, I personally think that it's an absolute shock that we have no national data on soil conditions since 2007. Considering it's one of our major natural resources, I think many of us are working in China and India and Africa, and yet in our own country, we have no data on soil condition at a national scale. That should be shameful for us as a nation. 4 per mil is an opportunity to think about some of these things, but we don't help ourselves sometimes as a community. So I have sat in rooms with ministers on the Parliamentary Soil Health Inquiry and heard my colleagues say all of these things at some point, which basically scuppers our ability to fight for a soil monitoring program. So I want to tackle each one of them and try and persuade you all that this is wrong, that we can do this. We know how to do it. We have been doing it. The UK is actually very rich in soil monitoring data, or at least it was until 2007. Soils are too diverse. It is the most beautiful thing to have on your wall, the soils map. It's just fabulous. We are one of the most diverse. In a small, tiny island, we have amazingly diverse soils. We don't know what to measure. Please. Soil is too slow to, soil organic carbon is too, soil, I've had a very long 2 years doing this stuff. Soil organic carbon is too slow to change. So what, let's not bother? Let's not do boring wet chemistry. I won't actually attribute the professor of soil science who said that to me, but anyway, I'm going to come back to that. Let's just focus where we know there are problems. So let's have a national soil monitoring program, but only do ambulance chasing. Let's only go to where we know there are problems. That means you don't know when there's a problem coming up that you haven't looked at and you went, Sample more where there are problems. Well, actually, as scientists, we should sample more where the variability is larger and we need bigger degrees of freedom. Hopefully all you students know that in Statistics 101. And it should be about finding solutions that work. Yes, I agree, but they're two entirely different things. One is about a dip test of your national soils to find out how you're doing. How are you meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals? And the second is trying to find robust solutions that work. Soil diversity, yes, it is fabulous. So here is soilscapes from Cranfield. It's absolutely beautiful. The geologists would actually say that's due to our fabulous geology, which is also fabulous, but let's not do the soils geology thing. All I would say is that if you've ever seen a plant diversity map, because it's also fabulous. And do we say the Biological Convention, Diversity Convention, do we say we can't do it? Not last time I heard. It's all about resources. You know, one day we are going to have the entire nation going up and sampling our soils for us, but basically, birds beat soil. I wish it wasn't true, but it is. We have fabulous bird diversity data and everything else, and it's about resources. The Water Framework Directive has been amazing for the water community. I only know the number for Wales, because I live in Wales. This is the equivalent of the EA in Wales, Natural Resources Wales. It's the merger of the Conservation Agency, the Water Agency, and the Forestry Agency. 80% of their monitoring budget goes on water, right? So, you know, leaves the rest for plant diversity and soils and what have you. So if you only have a tiny bit of money and it's all that diverse, you're not going to have a very good data set. The other is we don't know what to measure. You know, soil carbon, and should we measure, there's lots of different components of soil carbon. Well, someone just mentioned 30 of us got together in sheer frustration saying the one thing every soil scientist can usually agree on, that soil carbon is good, and more of it is never a problem. And so if you're going to measure one thing, and every single witness in front of the Soil Health Inquiry all said soil carbon was really important. So it is, let's not focus on the things we disagree on, which is what's the next most important thing to measure. At that point, it's herding cats. At that point, some people say pH, some people say it's nutrient, some people will say it's bulk density. But we all agree the first and most important thing is soil organic carbon. So we wrote a letter saying, That's not an excuse not to do monitoring. We agree, if you're only going to go and measure one thing, we can tell you what it is, just measure one thing, please, soil carbon. And also, if you're going to give farmers or anybody money to improve their soil, can you make sure that you get them to increase their soil carbon, because that's the biggest thing that improves soil water retention, nutrients, everything else. So go and look. Apparently, according to those who've been around for a long time, and that unfortunately probably includes me, this is the first time 33 soil professors have ever agreed, soil science professors have ever agreed on anything. So that's a great thing, and written to the Times to publicly announce it. So SOC is too slow to change. It is slow, but it can also be really rapid to lose it. To change it in the long-term stability, as we just heard, does take time, but it's too slow to change. But that doesn't mean to say we haven't measured it and we don't know how to do it. So apologies if you hear a little bit too much about Countryside Survey today, which is one of our national soil monitoring programs. I will immediately say there is the National Soil Inventory that Cranfield run for England and Wales, and there is the National Soil Inventory for Scotland that James Hutton run. Forest Research also do biosol. There are many programs, but personally, I'm responsible for this one, so you're going to hear it. This is Countryside Survey. We've been measuring GB soil since 1978, and we have got trends. It changes over time, and the trends differ according to what habitat you're in. And here is the really worrying loss. And this is, please note, statistically significant. So we can identify statistically significant changes in soil carbon over 5-10-year periods, right? So it's wrong to say we can't, it's too hard and it's too diverse. If you do proper, robust, standardized approaches, which this is based on, you can do it, okay? And we have done it, and we've reported it, which is exactly why we know we've got problems. I think one of the complications is people then look at, for example, when we aggregate this all up and add it all up, you can see some things are going up and some are down. So at a UK scale, for every country, there's no change. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that particular bits of our land isn't in trouble. So just because it's quite robust in a national scale doesn't mean to say different, because we manage our land differently. We manage our woodlands differently to our arable. So here's some of the citations that. And just in case you missed that, if you do the back of the envelope calculation, that loss in arable carbon that I just showed you is exactly equivalent to what we should be doing, but the wrong direction. Right? We're losing 0.4% a year over the last 25 years, not gaining it. So we've basically got to stop that, then we've got to increase it. So just in case it isn't hard, it's even harder, because we've got to go the opposite direction. But that is just for arable. You know, these sweeping statements that we're losing carbon everywhere, it's not true. We're scientists. Let's be quite specific and robust about what we're talking about. The other really good evidence we've got, just in case you didn't read the Soil Health Inquiry, is the peatlands. We know we have lost 86% of the peatland in East Anglia. And that is because we've mined it, it's basically just completely, we're draining it and it's just dropping. Meters in peat have disappeared because we use it to grow potatoes. Because apparently we don't like pits in our potatoes, we like them smooth, and that means you grow them in peatland. So go and pick a pitted potato next time. So we're not doing it. Not to say we shouldn't do it, but we're failing. And just to point out, we also know, so all those numbers were for land that's been in the same land use type. If you actually, through these soil surveys, log at the same time like we do, what is the vegetation in the land use type, you can then also spot that as we move land, either reduce intensity, very often because of cap payments, or increase intensity, which has happened over the time, you can basically increase carbon or decrease carbon, okay, depending about whether you move from fertile grass to infertile grass, or there's infertile grass to moorland. There's some quite challenging changes in here, particularly for the foresters. Some changes to woodland, actually moorland to wood, at least in topsoil, decreases your carbon, right? Woodland doesn't always, I know the Rothamsted Park grass, you grow trees on arable, you always increase carbon. After that, it's quite a variable thing. Anyway, that was an aside. Let's not do boring wet chemistry. I love some of the fantastic new methods that are coming through. They're great. We've all got research programs on them. They are fabulous. In 10 years, I'm sure we'll be working with them. At the moment, though, they have not been tested for our soils. You know, the Rothamsted tilled soils is not come up to my moorland sites in Wales. They're a little more challenging. Horizonated soils, they're a real bugger to measure. So whenever we do any of these measurements, They need to be demonstrated for all the major UK soil types, then we'll use it. Believe me, I do not want to be doing this in this way. But in the meantime, please don't mix up our doing this research, testing it. James Hutton are doing a fantastic thing using photographs. Photographing your soil, linking it to soil carbon, it might work, but let's check it for change, not stock. That's another thing. Stock's really easy to do by these metrics. Change, 0.4% a year is what you're trying to find. We've got to get methods that can do 0.4% a year, or say over 5-10 years percentages. So please, when you do a method and you can find stock, remember that's not what we're doing change. So let's focus where there's only problems. So if we'd done that, right, arable was the problem. We'd only be measuring arable now. Well, Wales, bless their cotton socks, believe in their soils, and they've been paying us to watch and continue to monitor their soils. And we've now got problems in the uplands. These habitat soils are basically our acid grasslands and our heathlands, and they are losing carbon big time now. And this is not called carbon concentration, it is actually carbon density in the topsoil. Carbon concentration is going down. We think we're one of the first people to actually measure changes in bulk density. That hasn't changed. So we do know this is a loss of topsoil carbon. And in places where it wasn't losing it, and in the last 10 years it is. Why is that? Really interesting research question, which we don't want to muddle up with, this is happening, this is statistics. So I just want to emphasize, if we'd just gone to arable systems, we would have missed this big change in our conservation land, okay? Now, just to put into perspective, other soils are doing okay. We've stabilized the arable and improved, and the woodlands are actually, whilst the carbon concentration is going up, we've got a decline in the bulk density, so woodlands are going down. So all in all, if you add it up at a national scale, Wales is stable, but habitat land, that's where a lot of our water comes from, perhaps a problem. Why? I'm just going to do a bit of science. The biggest change in our soils is actually the most phenomenal change in pH we have had over the last 30 years. Acid rain, very old story, but absolutely extraordinary, the experiment we did with our atmosphere. Sulfur emissions have declined by 80% since the 1980s. And this is the change in pH units. Now, you all know pH is a logarithmic unit, right? This is the most extraordinary change in pH. Now, the habitat land is the one that's changed. Now, look at the range that habitat land has moved across since 1978. That's exactly where we think microbes have a pH responsiveness. If you look in Pete Smith's Lacoste model and Joe Smith's Lacoste model, this is the range where microbes have a pH control. So it's why it's happening. I've got no idea. Anyone wants to come and play with us exploring this, but is it pH or is it something else? We don't know. We should sample where there are problems. I'm just going to go. I don't not hate arable. I love arable soils, but boy, are they easy. I'm sorry. They're well mixed, they're tilled, and they have the tiniest error bar in the world to do them at a national scale. You come and help us do some of these soils. These are horrible. Organomineral soils, a bit of organic, they're just really hard. So if we're going to put more effort, we should be pouring effort through these. Pete did a great publication where he basically showed to run his ECOS model through the Scottish data. It was like a giant, you could run a train through the results from James Hutton, because these numbers are really hard. This standard error bar, really small. At a national scale, they're easy to do, the arable ones. I do know that if you go to a particular field and you just want to characterize this field, you'd need 200 samples. That isn't what national soil monitoring is about. A field is just one sample with a field over there somewhere, which is another sample and another sample. That's your population. So we need to not mix these things up. It should be about finding solutions. I couldn't agree more, and we heard some really great examples and Pete Smith gives a great talk on this kind of thing about, you can just throw endless amounts of manure in a field and increase the carbon fantastically, but we don't have any more manure. We're already using it up. So we do need to find tillage, erosion, cover crops in the winter. I personally think some of the stuff that's happening with maize and erodible soil would be an immediate fix if we could stop giving payments for that. So we do need to do that. And I was at a great meeting that Liz Stockdale ran the other week on Soil Health Partnership. I ran out writing down all the logos about all the initiatives that are going on, experimental initiatives trying to find solutions for our soils. Okay, so there's lots, and I didn't have the folder with me, but here's just 3 of them. Further, it works on many soil types, not just in one experimental farm, but there's lots going on, but that is quite a different thing to national scale assessment. We need to kind of split that out. So the other thing is climate change is going to come and hit us like a train. Perhaps not at the moment, but in our experiments, this is a synthesis of all the long-term global climate change experiments in soil carbon by Tom Crowther. We're part of it. And it basically says the more you've got, the more you can lose. And that's our Welsh site. We drove, I mean, hopefully you all know that this kind of regression is a bit dangerous because a few points drive it, but never mind, it got into nature, so, you know. Plans for a rolling program. In sheer frustration, we have managed to persuade our directors that we're going to start. We're just going to start doing a rolling program following on from the country survey, just because we, for our research, need these national numbers. Okay, so we're not doing it to fill the statutory obligation that, frankly, our government should be filling it. We're doing it because we need data for our models to do better climate change forecasting. So we said we're going to start doing it, a rolling program, which means that it just starts saving money a bit, and we're only going to do these things. And it still will only be topsoil, and if anyone wants to challenge me why I'm not going to a meter depth, I don't have the money, right? So we're looking for people who want to co-fund with us. And then we'll archive all the samples and then do targeted work for a whole lot of other things where we've got money and where we've got questions, okay? So just biology, physics, archive, which people will be allowed to apply into to get some soils to do their science questions. I just want to emphasize, we're going backwards, not forwards in our national soil monitoring. Here's what we did in 78. Bless them, they at least started. 98, we expanded up to include Olsen P and metals and a lot of things. 2007, we went right the way through to even doing respiration, mineralization, what have you. And now look, the bright orange is the things we think we've got money for, and the yellow is things we'll just do on a hypothesis basis. We're going backwards, not forwards, which, considering soils is now, according to an announcement by George Eustace, which is the Minister of Agriculture in England, soils are going to be at the heart of our new agri-environment schemes. Terrific. Well, it would be great if our monitoring program kind of reflected that. And personally, I don't care who they fund to do the monitoring, just fund somebody. So it's not about, it's going to be countries, just fund somebody to do it, or a consortium of us or something. So carbon does not link to biodiversity. Our greatest soil biodiversity is actually in our arable systems, which is just one of those challenging, interesting things to think about. And if you do use new technologies, you get really interesting research insights to how soil functions. And here, just some of the things that we found. You know, using 14 carbon, you show that when you mix soil up and you sieve it, they do exactly the same thing. So it's something about structure that's really important. If you use satellites and what have you, you can start looking at greenhouse gas emissions. There's great stuff to do with this, but for the moment, wet chemistry gives us the kind of data which is really robust and repeatable. And just to mention Barry's work, who we recently lost so sadly, but over 500,000 soils are actually taken by farmers and sent to commercial labs. But they almost never measure carbon. Almost never. It's always NPK. There was an announcement by DEFRA, which I think I missed, I don't know how many others of you missed it, whereby the minister, by DEFRA, sorry, that they are going to ask all farmers to routinely sample and analyse their soils every 5 years, which is just a massive change. It's fantastic. Guess what they're not going to measure? Carbon is NPK and pH. So we're getting there, we just need to get them to do that. That extra data can be, what Barry said in this paper was you need a structured representative sample, and then these other kind of ad hoc numbers can really help infill, but you do need both. This is such a biased sample, rich farmers who get it, that you cannot get a robust national number out of this. So, please, a plea to let's not all reinvent all the hard work that was done in here. You know, we came up with the numbers, we just need to keep doing them. We need to do about policies. We pay farmers to grow maize on even eroding soils, which is just madness. Erosion is one of the, as we heard earlier, a great way to lose soil carbon. All that topsoil where all the carbon is just shoots down. So let's stop them doing it. Agricultural practices. We basically no public payment unless there's public benefit. So it's all in here. So let's just keep going and just keep pushing. We think there's an open door there now. Michael Gove has even gone on YouTube in a big parliamentary event to say he is going to soils, he's behind it. So we're really on a roll now. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Bridget. We've got time for any quick points for clarification, questions.
Dick Johnson from the
Hello, Dick.
Society. You mentioned habitat soils in Wales. I was just interested if you could be a bit more precise in terms of which particular soil.
Yes, so when we were reporting into Welsh Gov, we used the cross-compliance categories, which is basically improved land, which is arable, and improved grassland. And then there's woodland, and everything else is in the middle. So that is your acid grasslands, neutral grasslands, heathlands, and your bogs, I think, go in there as well. So it's all the non-till, non-fertilised and non-wood soils all go in there. We have dug then into that number, and we think it is basically something to do with the acid grasslands and heathlands. So it's probably something to do with grazing, liming, you know, the acidification issue going on. So we know it's not the bogs that are doing it. So it's that bit. And they're basically the cross-compliance categories.
Can it be that we see already the effect of climate change kicking in there?
It
Maybe you said 1% of loss?
It could be, and I think there's work we need to do, because I don't think it's warming. I think it'll be something to do with the hydrological cycle, and that's the kind of work we need to do, work with the modelers and work. So it's pH is just such an extraordinary thing, it's the clearest signal, but it could be climate change, or it could be some of the agri-environment schemes which have really focused on those types of land. They might have actually done some counterproductive on soil that they hadn't appreciated. So it's one of the usual three: climate change, air pollution, or land management. Unpicking those three drivers keeps us all in business.